All right. Hi, everybody. It's our CFB Talk 122. It's Tuesday night, and we like talking to you and all about what's going on in college football. My name's Bobak Hayeri. I'm going to be joined by my regular co host, JD Moore, and we're just firing this up right now. So if you have anything you want to ask about, talk about, just vent about in college football, go ahead and hit request. It's in the bottom left, and we'll go ahead and hear from you. But it's the off season, but there's always stuff to talk about. I know JD's been looking forward to having a conversation with us. He just had a slight distraction pop up right as we were about to start. Looks like he's actually going to join us in a moment. But yeah, what would you like to talk about? So just go ahead and hit request. We'd love to hear from you. And let's see what's been else has been going on these days. Obviously, you know, so many things going on in college football right now. I know the kind of more hot news of the moment is what's going on right now with Michigan because their co-offensive coordinator Matt Weiss was put on leave amid a police investigation. I'm sure we'll find out more about that. That was a very recent piece of news. So we'll see where that goes. In addition, I see my co-host is here, so let's go ahead and let JD up. It's been a little while, so I'd like to kind of hear from him what he's been up to. You know what? On sadder note, Tusk, Arkansas's live mascot, passed away. Tusk the fifth, and he passed away kind of young. One of our local Arkansas experts, that was a little young for a wild boar. But JD, have you made it up?
Yes, I have made it up. And yes, it has been a hot moment. If you've seen on my Twitter recently, ended up joining fatherhood. So we've got a kid now in through the portal. Solid five-star recruit. Has been a wonderful about 2 weeks or so with the firstborn kid in the household. So he got a very quick lesson about hope and sports and disappointment and all the things that go along with that with the national championship game. But fatherhood has been a grand adventure. And, I'm glad that I finally got a little bit of respite to come back, hang out with y'all, and talk a little bit of football tonight.
And our third co-host, Sirius, is here right now. How are you doing right now, man?
Doing well. Glad to be back.
Yeah, it's been a hot minute.
JD, the real question is, what kind of an NIL deal did you have to offer to pull off that kind of a recruit?
I ended up getting this really stupid agreement into like 18 years of like housing subsidies and food and all this other nonsense. I'll see if I regret that in the long term, but the upside is so high, you absolutely had to jump on a recruit like that.
Love it. And in the other news, I was of course covering the national championship in LA a couple of weekends ago, and now didn't take long. I think I got the new variant. It's my first time with COVID, so hey, that's been a ride. Luckily, the fever didn't last very long, and I've got most of my energy. Taught a class on Zoom earlier today, so I guess that's working out well. Hopefully, my voice doesn't just completely collapse. But we got a full house of hosts here. We'd love to hear from you. If you have a request, if you want to hit request, we'd love to hear your thoughts on college football, what's been going on, what you think is coming up in the future, and all the stuff like that. JD and Sirius, it's been a while. Maybe let's start with Sirius because it's been the longest for you. What's been the most interesting story in these closing weeks of the college football season and up into including this last week? Oh, that's classic Sirius. The system kicked him off. That's so funny. How about you, JD? I'm getting him back on.
Well, I think at least right now, not to rehash what we saw in the national championship game or the final games that we saw in the season, I think right now what's really intriguing for me is we just passed the deadline of these players being able to announce for the NFL draft who was going to stay back for another season, who was going to move on. Some of the moves that have happened there, this is the really pinnacle moment for teams like a Michigan or a Notre Dame or an Oklahoma or these other teams that don't necessarily recruit at the powerhouse level of a Georgia, of an Alabama, of an Ohio State, for them to really retain production and bring on a roster for next year that's going to be so critical for them to try to compete again. I think there's been a really fantastic crop of athletes that have decided to stay back for at least one more year, and I don't think we've necessarily had any huge surprises about people announcing to the NFL. Like, I don't think anybody was shocked when we saw stuff like CJ Stroud going off into the NFL, when we saw Max Duggan from TCU deciding that he was going to forego his final season availability at TCU. There's a lot of different guys who now have the opportunity to kind of step up and retain that production. And I think that's going to be just so critical for all these teams that we want to see compete in the next year. To see some of these moves have been absolutely fascinating.
So, Sirius, if you have made it up, we'd love to hear your thoughts on what have been the most interesting stories for you in these past couple of weeks of the season.
Yeah, I think that there were some interesting things that have happened during the bowl season. The conference bowl records, that was a little surprising. Obviously, the MAC came out and had a great year, but the Big 12 really struggled, going 2-7, which it seemed like that was a conference that had a lot of strength throughout, kind of top to bottom. But they just kind of underperformed during the bowl season. Obviously, TCU pulling off one win and also then taking one loss in the final game. And then I'd say even like the Big Ten finishing with, was it 3 teams ranked? And they're all in the top 10, but they're the only 3 teams in the Big Ten ranked, which is a little bit unusual. And then the Pac-12, some serious struggles there, and USC just having no answer for Tulane. Wasn't going to be a secret what the playbook was going to be there, but how Alex Grinch still has a job is just mind blowing to me. If you're considering your career right now, that is kind of a life goal right there, is to have that kind of job stability despite having truly atrocious performance. No matter what, he's still going to get paid, which just very surprising. Think that the semifinal games, though, that was probably the highlight for me. Like, we had a lot of great New Year's Six games, but both of the semifinal games were great, which has not always been the case. So it was exciting to see that. And with other New Year's Six games being pretty competitive for the most part, looking forward to an expanded playoff and what kind of chaos that could bring, and maybe some more matchups that we don't normally get to see.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, if we're going to talk about expanded playoff, I mean, look, a team like Georgia is probably going to win the national championship in any setting that we would have had this year for a title. But man, talk about some of the crazy games we had this year with 2 incredible semifinals, probably the 2 best pair of semifinals we've had since the playoff was invented. Definitely, at least the best semifinal game since that classic Georgia-Oklahoma game in the Rose Bowl a couple years back. But I think one of the great things about an expanded playoff would mean that we get more crazy bonkers games like USC and Tulane. I don't think anybody's going to stand here and pretend that USC or Tulane was going to beat Georgia in a national championship game. But what a fantastic game to watch. High scoring, lots of craziness. And, just imagine the thought of, Tulane beats USC and then they get to go on to advance to play a TCU or a Tennessee or insert team here. That means that we get another wild and crazy game between 2 teams we wouldn't typically see, a matchup talent that would just be incredibly fun, entertaining football. The result is probably still the same. You're still probably going to get that blue chip heavy team where it's going to be your Georgia or your Ohio State or your Alabama or any of those other teams, which is going to happen anyway, regardless of how college football is already designed. But we get more of those bonkers games, and that's what I would absolutely love to see.
If I could ask you guys another question, and again, if any of you out here would like to join us, just go ahead and hit request. We'd love to hear from you. That's in I think, the bottom left. But, what do you guys think of this whole drama with Jaden Rashada? I mean, he's now apparently finally done what everyone was expecting and formally requested his release, and to void his his NLI with the program. What is your whole thoughts on this? Is this going to be? I mean, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the saga with Florida. It's been kind of this whole thing. He was allegedly offered $13 million, to play for the Gators, and this whole saga that apparently this agreement was made back in November, and then there's this slow period where it appears that the deal fell apart, and now it looks like the culmination of that is he's not going to be a part of the Gators. What are your thoughts on this whole saga?
My question is, how ridiculous does it have to get before we reach the point where it tops what happened with Alex Collins, and the whole Arkansas situation from back in like 2013, where his mom didn't want him to go there, so she stole his NLI before he could fax it in, and like
I
she
remember
ran
that.
away and hid it, um, which was just kind of like a wild situation where like that could hold up this whole situation. And of course, that was back when you had to have an actual fax machine, so it wasn't like you could just do it on your phone and send it in. Um, but yeah, the whole will they, won't they thing with Florida, and then you throw the money into it, and it's just uh, it's fantastic television, I guess. Um, but it's kind of a crazy situation right now.
I mean, yeah, $13 million was, I've been curious about that. And I've been trying to figure out what went wrong there. And I'm picturing, and this is purely speculation, but I'm picturing somebody, maybe they use a middleman to sort of set that up, oh yeah, we'll get you $13 million. And then the actual people who would supply that kind of money were sort of like, not sure I'm feeling that, I'm not sure I'm gonna put that kind of money up. And next thing you know, they've got this guy to commit on something. I'm wondering who's gonna learn the most out of this. I mean, I'm sure this is gonna cause a lot of NIL collectives to kind of maybe rethink how they approach these kinds of deals. I mean, depending on the documents that were signed, I'd be curious to see what comes of it. It seems like, assuming he gets let go, I mean, he released, pardon me, at his request and can go to another program. This may not get too nasty, but I mean, this is one of those things where there's enough money at stake there where I would, things go a little wrong and lawsuits start appearing, which, from a sheer chaos standpoint, if you like seeing college football kind of go off the rails, that would be one of those. But this has been one of those stories that I'm utterly fascinated by, only because I've been kind of waiting to see something like this happen. That one of these sorts of deals kind of blows up, and I know JD, you wanted to kind of follow up on there, and then we have our friend Gamecock Superman on, who might want to bring up a new topic. But JD, what are your thoughts?
So I think one of the other things, at least with this whole Rashada saga, is you kind of hit it on the head of we've been waiting for a moment like this of an ideal that's gone horrifically off the rails. I think one of the things that we're seeing here is, at least in the terms of money that's involved, I mean, let's throw out there that Brock Purdy, he was recently drafted in the NFL, was seeing some playing time with the Buccaneers, and then he signed a 4-year, $3.7 million contract. We're talking right now with this whole saga right now with Jaden and the University of Florida, we're talking $13 million. That was at stake already. Some of these guys are now making more than what they would in the pros. I think that was a natural evolution with the sport, especially with how much money now goes to coaches, how it goes to administration, how it goes into facilities. I don't think it's necessarily a surprise to see how much money is involved in that. But I think it's definitely intriguing to see that this is the first one that, at least publicly, has gone so sour. And to the fact that it is $13 million at stake, I know it's one thing where early in recruiting that you say, oh, NIL isn't a big deal. It is something entirely different when someone is paying you more than a late round draftee in the NFL. It's going to be an issue no matter what. I don't think it's necessarily bad for anything else with a player. I think they have a full right to say, hey, we were expecting this type of money. We expect this deal to be agreed upon. But what an absolute mess. But in the same aspect, what an expectation. Given the money that is in college football, I'm glad that these guys have the ability to command $13 million. I don't know necessarily if that's going to be scalable at large for how long that's going to be scalable. But the fact that they're able to command that and deal with that, it's a new headache for coaches who, again, are making all these gigantic contracts that they're already making. I don't think it's necessarily that big of a deal that he's decided to leave Florida because of something flubbed in this NIL deal. But man, what a moment for the sport to realize that this is now something that is truly impacting recruiting.
I think the one thing that we can count on to come from this is that there are going to be a large number of boosters who learn absolutely nothing from it and wind up in a similar situation, maybe not for $13 million, but some kind of a similar situation in the future, barring any significant changes to NIL rules. And my citation on that is the Auburn Boosters.
Oh goodness. Hey, you know what? Gamecock Superman, thanks for being patient. What's up?
Hello. I'd like to sort of, keep going on this track of, NIL and how it's affecting recruiting and roster moves in the off season. Because we're at that point, we're getting close to signing day and all that good stuff. One thing I heard a lot when I was following South Carolina's recruiting specifically was that we missed out on a lot of, recruits in the transfer portal just because of how much NIL money these like high profile transfer players were demanding. And I don't think, if this were a pre NIL world, we would have missed out on it, because you look at our program right now, we've got a young head coach who's trending upward. We just had an amazing end to the season. And so I'm just wondering, like, do you guys think this market, that there will be somebody that will step in and sort of take the money down a little bit, and not necessarily disallow players from getting paid, but keep it to a more reasonable level, because obviously the market is incredibly inflated? And or do you think that the market will sort of go down on its own as boosters sort of realize, hey, this money that these guys are demanding to transfer really isn't worth it? Because I don't see this ending well for the sport. I think most people who work within college athletics as coaches, administrators, boosters, people who are in charge of these NIL collectives, don't like the kind of tactics and kind of stuff that is going on behind the scenes with regards to like bidding wars for players and whatnot.
So I don't think there's necessarily any kind of inflection point coming up anytime soon,
Well, I know
because
JD was planning to talk, but I think his connection is kind of acting wonky. Unmuted. Um, I'll kind of just give an. Oh, JD, did you get it to work? Oh, I can see you
yep.
muting and unmuting.
Am I back on again?
Oh,
Can you all
can't
hear
hear
me?
you. Well, here I'll kind of give my thought on that. I'm not sure if you can necessarily. I'm sure they're going to try to figure out some way. I mean, everyone's afraid to have like the actual Congress do something to try and resolve it. I mean, I'm curious to see if we get the NCAA trying to step in to do anything at this point. I think though, really, what it's going to almost take is buy-in from the bigger donors that would make these kinds of make these kinds of donations, because and these deals, only because they're the ones that would they've always found ways to give money anyway. So the question is, will it take them some level of, a sanity check? Will it take, I mean, I wonder if it takes something like a deal like Jaden Rashada, or something, gosh, even worse happening, where maybe money does get transferred and somehow it falls apart, and somehow the player ends up with money that, doesn't end up with them on the field, or turns into an ugly lawsuit. I could see an a lot of, I always say, a lot of the regulations we see in various industries are because something went really, really wrong at one point and everyone kind of learned. And I'm wondering if that's what it's going to take. Do we need a really dramatic um, blow up? And this was dramatic, but I don't think it was really a blow up. It was more like an embarrassment. But I wonder if that's what it would take. JD, were you able to get that sorted out?
Hey, speaking of
Yeah.
guys who spend way too much money on things, Elon Musk spent $44 billion on Twitter for technical support such as this. Anyway, one of the things that I think that we're not going to see any kind of inflection point anytime soon when it comes to NIL collectives trying to spend money on transfers or recruits is, I feel like we've been beating this drum for a long time. And I remember in the late 2000s, early 2010s, it was, oh, surely the boosters can't keep paying to have these facilities that have slides in it. Oh, surely they can't throw in more money for a weight room. Oh, surely they can't throw in more money for an indoor facility. And then we kind of shifted more into, oh, there's no way that they couldn't pay an assistant coach $1 million. Oh, there's no way you could pay a defensive coordinator $2 million. Oh, there's no way that you could pay a coach $8 million. And now we're at a point where, just this offseason, Lane Kiffin gets floated for the Auburn job, and Ole Miss responds to him finishing the season 0-4 by making him one of the top 10 paid coaches in the country. I think as long as there's money available, there's going to be fools willing to part with it in the sake of winning college football games. And I don't think we're anywhere close to the amount of money that at least needs to be burned before we're at a point where it's just no return. I think one of the huge things is, at least in what I've had in conversations of people who build facilities, is a lot of the facilities are up to date. And there's not really a whole big need of people going, hey, thank you so much for giving us $1 million. We were able to build this new weight room. It's more of a, we don't know what else to build here. Can you keep giving the university $1 million and we'll find some way to utilize that? And I think that's part of the reason of why these NIL collectives are now getting a lot more money. Whereas in the past, a lot of these schools would be like, hey, we got to keep up with the Joneses. We got to get this new indoor facility. We got to go get this new weight room. We got to go get this new nutrition program. It's a lot of money has already been spent in capital infrastructure that these schools no longer need that money to go to it. But these guys still want to spend money on their program. I mean, take, for example, like a Cody Campbell up at Texas Tech. We had him on the show earlier in the season. I mean, this is a guy who is worth more than $1 billion. He's already spent $25 million to get the field named after him, put in all this down payment for the renovation of Jones Stadium out in Lubbock. And, he's still a man with money to burn. So what's he going to do with that money? He's going to make sure that the NIL collective at Texas Tech is well stocked and they can go after recruits. There's a lot more guys like that who want to support their alma mater, or in an instance where they're a big businessman and they want a successful school to be behind them in the place that they do business, raise their quality of life. They're going to find ways to trickle that money down somewhere. And if these schools are saying, listen, we don't need any more money to pay our coaches or to build up our facilities, those guys are eventually going to go, listen, I want Florida football to succeed. Here's $13 million. Go find me a quarterback.
Yeah, and I think that one thing we have to keep in mind is that,
and now it's Sirius's turn not to have his audio work. That's so funny. Oh, it's one of those days. Hey, at least mine is working purportedly. But
can you hear me?
Get him connected back up. Gamecock Superman. Oh, you can hear him, JD? So am I the one who can't hear him?
Yeah.
Yeah, I could hear JD earlier. So
that's so funny.
I can hear him as well.
Man.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Sorry about that, Sirius. I've been talking all over you, apparently, but I can't hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, one thing that we have to keep in mind is that, in athletic departments are parts of universities, they're nonprofits. They have no incentive at all to, end the year with money left in the budget. They want to spend everything they can get in some way because that's the whole point of it. They don't need to carry over black in their budgets. They can spend it all. It's not like a business. So yeah, their incentive there is to get the most bang for their buck, bring in as many donations. We're seeing this more and more often where you have to donate to the school's general, endowment or into general scholarship funds in order to get like season tickets and things like that. So they're finding ways to shift money from donors and alumni over into the school itself, but they want to spend all the money that they can get. And with the NIL thing, because you're technically paying for a service, you're paying for advertising, things like that, that's a tax write-off if you're a business. Instead of just spending your own money, you can also spend your company's money on it. And I mean, there's some pretty creative advertising deals. I don't think anybody's going to get $13 million worth of advertising out of a 19-year-old or an 18-year-old, whatever it is. But there are ways to justify the amount of money that you're spending in terms of, the cash flow aspect of it. I think that you're more likely to see people run into issues where you have NIL collectives that kind of are going off on their own, or you have donors who are going off on their own. So they're making these crazy offers to recruits. that then don't match up with what the coaches are telling them. You know, that I think is where you might see some pushback coming from the universities themselves, from their own employees, of trying to put the reins on these collectives when it comes to the NIL deals. And we're already hearing a little bit of pushback and some concerns about, if you offer this guy for $13 million and he gets buried on the depth chart, NIL deals can't be connected to on-field performance. So you've kind of backed yourself into a corner there. And it's going to be interesting to see how this evolves, because I think right now there's a lot of people super, super excited about it. So they're throwing a bunch of money at this. But once you start seeing if those on-field results don't match the amount of money you're putting into it, if you sink $20 million into the roster and you still finish the season at 5-7, not to name any teams in particular who had a bunch of, highly ranked recruits that didn't go to a bowl game this past year. But if you start seeing that, then number one, are we going to see pressure to fire the coach, force turnover on the coaching staff? Or are we going to see that money dry up? And if that money dries up, are they also going to say, we're going to pull our money from what we're giving you already, whether we're sponsors for different things on your campus or your athletics department, if they're individual donations, are they going to use that as, kind of a carrot and a stick situation to try to get the change that they want? Because shocker, shocker, a lot of these guys who have the money to put in substantial amounts also have pretty big egos and are used to getting their way. So I think that's going to be the more interesting dynamic, not the aspect of, well, we just can't afford to spend this anymore. It's, we can't afford to spend this without getting the results that we expect to get, and see who winds up driving the bus on this, whether it's still the schools or whether the donors actually wind up with more influence because of the amount of money that they're putting into the system.
Well, I mean, another aspect of this I think is kind of interesting is the fact that, these kids are getting these contracts, but unlike in a, professional sports world type of situation, they have no actual obligation to the school or to stay on the roster, like, at all. They could just literally take the money, that they get from one year and then, get an offer from another school and go to that school for more money. And I think that's a big issue as well. And I'm just not sure how to fix it at this point, because any situation in which you would attempt to regulate this from an NCAA standpoint or even a conference standpoint, I think would end in some kind of lawsuit, which obviously, the conferences and the NCAA don't want to fight.
Quick reminder, contract law is still a thing. So, if you sign a contract with a guy that he's going to be, he's going to have to perform to the level of the contract, whether that's however many ads, however many commercials, public appearances, things like that. And it's only going to be, when he's on the team. It can't be for, if he throws however many touchdowns, he gets X amount of money. But it can be, you're on the roster while you are a student at this university, then, this is the compensation you're going to receive. So you can tie that in. Hopefully, most of the donors are, well-versed enough to at least have some lawyers involved. Some of them, this could be the really interesting part, is if somebody screws up and makes an offer to like a 15-year-old, and they sign a contract with them and don't get the parents' signature as well, then you could have some weird stuff with contract law, which Bobby's probably, dying that he can't hear this part if he can't. But yeah, if it's a 15-year-old, if it's a minor, then you get into some weird aspects of contract law where maybe the contract's valid, maybe it's not. Kind of depends on who's involved. So there could be some really interesting stuff there if someone is dumb enough to offer a minor a lot of money and actually get them to sign without any adults involved. So that could be interesting. But as far as, someone just absconding with a bunch of money, they still have to perform to the terms of the contract in order to get paid. So that at least is a little bit more above board than what it used to be when you were just handing people sacks of cash. And I mean, if we're going to talk about like the money rampant in sports, I was on a flight recently, and the guy sitting beside me is talking about how back in the 80s he played for a very non-revenue sport on scholarship at a large school that was the Power Five school now, and there was always groceries in the fridge. There would be people slipping them, $20 here, $100 there, coolers full of free beer. The job that he had, the job he had in that college town while he was on the team was he worked at a record store, and his duties were to go in and decide what music they were going to play for the day. So there have always been ways of throwing money into it for reasons that don't even make any sense. He wasn't going to be somebody who was a star athlete, impacting their ability to get a championship. He was just on the team and still kind of got those perks. So at least now it's a little bit more above board. People will still find ways to kind of skirt the rules as they can. But for the most part, at least now we kind of see the money changing hands, and the kids are actually able to get a lot more money this way than back when it was all under the table.
Hey, I just want to take a second. Gamecock Superman, thank you for pointing out what was happening. I did not realize the audio errors. For some reason, I could hear you, but not my co-hosts. So that's why apparently I was talking all over JD earlier. That's so funny. I had to reset my end of the app, and I think
That's
I got
no
it working
problem,
again.
but I
So
appreciate
I just
you
wanted to.
letting me put my 2 cents on this NIL situation. I think, this is going to be a, constant thing in the new landscape of college athletics. So I guess we'll just have to see what happens.
Absolutely. So again, if anyone else you want to also bring up topics, feel free to hit request. We'd love to hear from you here on our CFB Talk 122. It's Tuesday night, and we love just getting input from you guys about whatever you want to talk about in college football. So, guys, what other topics have been kind of getting your attention this week? Just out of curiosity. I mean, what has been it's off season, but there's still some stuff going on. What are the latest things? I mean, we talked a little bit, obviously, about the whole Rashada saga, but I don't know, the Rasaga doesn't quite blend. But what else has been catching your mind?
I think one of the interesting things that we've seen is Clemson going outside of the family for a new offensive coordinator, pulling in Garrett Riley from TCU, and parting ways with one of their own, one of their former players who had been their offensive coordinator. Dabo Swinney typically has always stayed within the Clemson family for a lot of his hires. It almost to me kind of feels like that moment when Lane Kiffin took the job at Alabama as the offensive coordinator in terms of paradigm shift of, hey, what we're doing isn't working and we want to get back to a different way. I think that's a really remarkable change for Clemson, especially given the fact that, this was another quote unquote disappointing year for Clemson. Ended up losing pretty badly to Tennessee in a New Year's Six Bowl, missed out on another playoff run, a lot of offensive issues, and DJ, again, showing he wasn't the guy at quarterback for the Tigers. He's now transferred to Oregon State. You've got your new quarterback who is all set up and ready to go, but now you have this new offensive coordinator coming in from a team that just played in the national championship. A remarkable hire for the Clemson Tigers.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting to see, because I know a lot of Clemson fans have gotten really frustrated about Dabo kind of not going outside of the Clemson gene pool when it comes to hiring assistants, whether it's former coaches that he's worked with before or it's former players. Um, and it's interesting to see him make the move now. Kind of wonder if maybe this was like the final straw of, this is clearly not working. I have to make a move now before, people really start getting mad. Because the offensive coordinator position for Clemson, it's not been a great point for that team for a few years now. And there were a lot of people I know that saw the Tony Elliott to UVA move as being addition by subtraction. And then this one would be subtraction by subtraction, or I guess addition by very much subtraction. So it'll be interesting to see what Riley can bring in and the changes he can make. Like you said, a new starting quarterback for them. So he'll have kind of new ground to work with because we saw a little bit, but not a whole lot. So it'll be exciting to kind of see how that develops over the offseason and what this Clemson team looks like in the fall, because they're going to have a lot of their big bodies that are coming back on both sides of the ball. So he's definitely got a lot to work with, and the defense isn't having to do a full reset like they have in previous years.
Absolutely. And I saw we had someone up here, but it looks like they dropped out of the stage. That's no problem. One of the other stories that I found pretty amusing was that I guess Arch Manning can't really keep his ID on him very frequently. I guess has he lost it a couple of times now? And I guess his full name is Archibald Manning. I just noticed that. We were looking at what some of the more popular posts were in the last week on our CFB, and that was one of them, although it was apparently removed by Reddit because that was personal information, even though it was I guess it makes sense. It was a student ID. I think it was his Texas ID. You guys remember that story, guys?
Yeah, he's lost his Texas student ID a couple times, so people keep finding it and taking pictures of it and putting it on the internet. So, hey, Arch, come get your contact me, come get your ID. If you follow your alma mater, your current college's subreddit or something like that, you see that pretty frequently where, need to get in contact with so-and-so, found their ID, found, their wallet, whatever. A little bit different when you're a 5-star recruit and have a couple of really famous uncles and a grandfather and also Coops your dad. So, yeah, just a little bit different.
As long as he can find the end zone, right? You lose your ID, but as long as you can find the end zone and don't lose the ball, that's good. So,
someone did mention that his apparent lack of pocket awareness is starting to be concerning.
Oh, that's good. I like that one. Oh, goodness. Let's see here. What other topics have been kind of getting you guys interested? Again, folks, if you want to join us, just hit request. We'd love to hear from you.
Hey, if we want to talk about other big news stories, Kevin Warren did his job with the Big Ten, and he's out. And we're now looking at the fourth Power 5 conference, at least for their commissioner, being a new person hired within the last 3 years or so, joining Brett Yomark, Klankoff off in the Pac-12, and now you'll have this new commissioner for the Big Ten. I think it's going to be absolutely fascinating to see where they go from here. I know that a couple of ties have already been thrown out to some people like Jim Phillips, who's the current commissioner of the ACC, Jennifer Heppel, who was a finalist not too long ago for the Big Ten job. She's currently in charge of the Patriot League. Plenty of athletic director candidates. I think Gene Smith would probably be high up there. You're probably going to look at, if you want to consider other Big Ten athletic directors, you've got Martin Jamond, who is out at UCLA. He's probably going to be a candidate as well. But as we've already seen from a couple of hires recently in the Power 5, they've gone completely outside of the box when it comes to actually bringing in a commissioner. We've even seen at the NCAA level of bringing Charlie Baker, the governor of Massachusetts, in, who had never had any kind of experience with college sports administration before. I'm fascinated to see where the Big Ten goes from here. They've already got their TV deal signed and good to go. It looks like they're going to be standing pat on realignment for the moment. Very curious to see where the Big Ten decides their next priorities are and who they decide is their chief executive to follow those.
I'm not entirely shocked he's leaving. I'm a little surprised, but not entirely shocked because we've talked about him before. We actually, back in the spring had a writer from Sportico who wrote an excellent article kind of talking about his saga at the Big Ten, all the way from, taking over right before, after, taking over after one of the true legends of college football commissionerdom. And then, what happens? He gets there, and soon afterwards, he has to deal with probably the worst situation, the worst crisis that's ever hit the Big Ten with the COVID-19 pandemic in those early that early season and all the crisis that he had to manage there. And that entire time, what I found more fascinating was how he was basically taking a conference that, under the same commissioner for what it was like 30 years, had still kept a lot of the mentality of the 80s, where conferences were still, they were important, and they, don't get me wrong, the Big Ten's always been one of the top conferences, but they were run a little bit more informally. It was like a kind of, everyone was buddies, everyone kind of worked together, and it was, people getting deals done based on personality. And he came from a very formal, he'd worked for NFL teams like the Vikings. He had been always in that more formal corporate environment. So he really took time to transform the Big Ten on the inside into something that would be more familiar, well, to those who work at companies that earn the kind of money the Big Ten does, because it's a very large $1 billion, entity. And so he brought them up to a level that they actually now are organized and seem to be operating on that kind of level. But at the same time, I could see how that would burn him out a little bit. And the idea of now joining the Bears and joining that organization, probably a comparable, if not better salary. I think all of that made it more attractive to him, and I kind of get why he left after the time he was there. But yeah, I kind of there's a lot of hope there. I've been impressed by Yormark at the Big 12. I haven't hid that fact, and what I've seen of him in person, and even briefly had some interactions with him, I've been impressed. So yeah, we'll see there. JD, I know you wanted to follow up on this.
Yeah, I think one other really fascinating note that I think is also going to at least throw a wrinkle into the complexity of this hire is the idea that 12 out of the 14 schools currently in the Big Ten have had a new president since Kevin Warren was first hired in 2019. And then if you add the two schools from California, USC with Carol Folt, she was hired soon after Kevin Warren was appointed to the job. UCLA, their president has been there for quite a while, but if we're looking at the 16 teams and their presidencies, you are looking at 13 of them having new administrations since Kevin Warren was hired, and that wasn't too long ago. So to see kind of where all this new slate of school presidents decide these are going to be our priorities, I am fascinated to see if they're going to continue to be proactive, if they want to be a little bit more reactionary to some of the news that has happened in college football with NIL, with the NCAA going after Charlie Baker and pretty much waving the white flag and saying, Congress, please, for the love of God, save us. Where they end up going from there, I think, is going to be really, really intriguing to figure out where college football is going to move from here. And not just college football, but college athletics as well. There's a lot of new opportunity here for the Big Ten to make a huge announcement and bring in somebody to once again change the way that, like, Brett Yormark came in and completely blew up the way that Bob Bowlesby had done it in the Big 12. I'm fascinated to see where these school presidents are going to come on consensus for their new executives.
I think the strategy behind that of who you hire is going to be interesting because, like you had said, right now the Big Ten's relatively stable. They've kind of got the next few years already mapped out. So they kind of know what type of person they need. They're not looking for expansion. They're not looking for that. They're looking for consolidation, paying attention to those media rights deals, whatever else the presidents have on their mind as being important in the next, say, 5 years. Which the way that the college football and college athletics landscape has changed in recent years, that's a kind of a unique privilege that a lot of conferences I don't think have had, because so many big changes have been thrown at them, whether that's Texas and Oklahoma to the SEC or USC, UCLA to the Big Ten. How you're going to react to that? Like George Klavikov, his role, the conference that he has now is drastically different from the conference that he got hired to run. And obviously, I don't think anybody at the Pac-12 saw that as being a realistic probability at the time when they were looking to make that hire. Now the Big Ten has the chance to sit back and, do we want, this kind of person or that kind of person in order to run this conference for, the foreseeable future. So it's a unique privilege that they have in being able to have that foresight. So it'll be really interesting to see what decision they make if they go for someone who's outside the box, that has connections with business, with, brand relationship, that kind of aspect, or if they go kind of inside the college ranks and make a more traditional hire.
Another topic I've been wanting to bring up is just the saga of Ed Reed. He's been, he's been his own one man kind of story in and of itself, with his own social media tweets, and then finally he walked them back and kind of gave a formal written apology about what he was saying about the struggles of HBCU programs like his at Bethune Cookman. But what have you guys thought of that? For those who may not be familiar, obviously Ed Reed, legendary football player, Miami, in the NFL, and now, he agreed to be the new head coach of Bethune Cookman up in Daytona. And then now that he's there, he's been kind of sort of venting about what he's been seeing, I guess, with the program, and kind of hinting at the administration. One of the quotes is, "I'm walking out here with the football team, picking up trash. I should leave. I'm not even under contract yet. Um, these colorful language didn't even clean my office when I got here." So, I mean, what are you guys making of this? What have you guys thought of that whole story?
I think first and foremost, I think it's kind of the lessons we've seen from Deion Sanders taking over at Jackson State and now at Colorado, where content and attention is king more so than anything else. I think right now Bethune Cookman is looking for any opportunity to get in the spotlight. And I think if you're Ed Reed, you also know you're supposed to drum up. If I am in headlines, people are thinking of this. And I think the other thing too is Ed Reed is probably going into this of, yes, he's got some emotion charge behind that. Yes, he's got frustration happening with a new job, especially as a guy who, is taking on a head coaching role for the first time ever. But this might also have been something where, behind the scenes, he wanted some kind of motivation from Bethune Cookman to say, hey, I want to make sure that we can compete at these specific levels. I want to put a fire under your butts to make sure that it actually happens. I don't think it's necessarily anything too big or crazy just as of yet, because again, this is a guy who knows content is king. He's brought out the first, at least, announcement of "I'm here to change things." He did put out an apology, and I think for the most part, it's going to work out just fine. But at least in terms of what we've seen from Deion Sanders coming in and being a huge splash at an HBCU, parlaying that into getting eyeballs and attention. Let's not forget, when Deion Sanders first took the Jackson State job, he made huge deals of, oh, my stuff was getting stolen out of locker rooms. Oh, our facilities aren't up to speed. I should leave because da 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 da. I'm almost more than confident that Ed Reed is playing a very similar playbook to at least get stuff started up and off the ground at Bethune Cookman.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think he's trying to do the right thing. And I think the only part that I think struck a weird chord for me was whether when he said, I'm not even under contract, why should I even be here, is kind of the vibe I got from that second rant. His earlier one was just more kind of confirming that the struggle is real, and the things that folks had heard. For example, Dion saying when he was getting a Jackson State were exactly what he was seeing down at Bethune Cookman. But at the same time, yeah, I think he's trying to do exactly that kind of method and bring attention to the program. And one thing though that Dion did that worked is he got him winning. So if he can get Bethune Cookman winning, that'll be impressive. I know. Again, we've talked about it in previous shows that even before Ed Reed was hired, that program has been struggling quite a bit. They've been dealing with as much administration problems as the athletic ones. They were brought in, for those who don't remember, they were in the MEAC, which is one of the two HBCU conferences. Then the SWAC poached two teams from the MEAC. They poached Florida A&M, FAMU, and FAMU, pardon me, and they poached Bethune Cookman because they're a natural pair in Florida. And FAMU's been doing good, but yeah, Bethune Cookman's just been having all kinds of trouble. So that was kind of the hope there. They got Ed Reed to take it over and maybe galvanize them, but that has been definitely quite an interesting series of videos that he issued this week. And again, he apologized for it. And I'm sure, again, all this will be nothing if will be totally just one more hiccup or humorous anecdote if the program gets winning and things keep moving. So what do you guys think? So CJ Stroud left for the NFL draft. I don't think anyone was shocked by that. I mean, obviously I'm sure he wishes he could kind of go back on those, have a better final couple of games, but that finale wasn't bad. I mean, they lost, but it was certainly a hell of a game there. What did you guys think of that?
No, definitely a competitive game, but I think CJ Stroud is going to be one of those guys who goes down at Ohio State with a very weird legacy. This is a guy who Heisman finalist, exceptionally talented quarterback, Rose Bowl winner, very likely a first round draft pick. But I think there's a lot of people at Columbus who will go, hey, you know what? That guy as a starter never beat Michigan. That guy as a starter never won the Big Ten. That guy as a starter never won a playoff game. I think that's going to be a little bit of a weird legacy for CJ Stroud to leave behind, because I don't think there's any doubt whatsoever that he delivered on his goods of, I'm a 5-star quarterback. I'm going to bring talent. I'm going to elevate this offense. But at the end of the day, if you're an Ohio State fan, beating Michigan is still the end goal. Getting into the playoffs is still the goal. Winning the Big Ten is still the goal. And for CJ Stroud, yes, he got the Rose Bowl. Yes, he's going to do well in the NFL. Yes, he got to go to New York as the Heisman. But the fact that he failed on those goals, I think it's going to be a very strange legacy for him in Ohio.
I'd agree. And if we're talking about the Ohio State Michigan rivalry, Michigan's bringing a lot of talent back, including, it appears, Jim Harbaugh, until we find out the new rumor next week that he's interviewed with an NFL team. But they've got a lot of guys that have decided to come back one more time. So apparently the taste that they've gotten the past couple of years, that success, they're wanting to make one more go of it before they head to the NFL, some of these big name players. So it'll be interesting to see how Ohio State reloads after coming, so close to beating Georgia and going to the title game, and then how they get themselves ramped up to try to take on this Michigan team that has been built to beat Ohio State the past 2 years. Harbaugh has finally got it figured out and dialed in, so it'll be interesting to see how that evolves and what kind of changes Ohio State makes in order to finally get the job done, because it's been a while since they've been able to say, we came away with a win over Michigan.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're in Ohio State, you always measure your season by that. I think there's a lot of Ohio State fans who, they'd be happy that they've won a huge amount of games, but a lot of them are bitter about this season, specifically because not just losing to Michigan was a bad feeling for them, but the way that they lost, the way that it took them out of the championship hunt, and the fact that it was the second year in a row that Jim Harbaugh not just beat them, but also flirted with I don't know if I'm actually going to come back next year. We're going to figure that one out. I think if he goes next year and gets a third consecutive win over Ohio State, I think we might be at that point of Ryan Day doesn't even have 10 losses in his tenure, but there's going to start having a couple of very loud voices saying, is this the guy that we still want out there? It's going to be one of those things of everybody wants to see Ryan Day succeed. Ohio State fans want to see this type of success with the Buckeyes. But if you go 3 consecutive losses to Jim Harbaugh at Michigan after you had owned him for so long in his tenure at Michigan, and now it's just all of a sudden we can't find a way to address the run game. We can't stop the explosive plays of Michigan. How the hell does TCU play a playoff game against them and never once trail to Michigan, yet we couldn't figure out how to beat them this year? That's a huge problem if you're an Ohio State fan, because there is no loss that is more infuriating to a Buckeye than to one of a Wolverine.
And after that Michigan TCU game, there were people who made the comment that Michigan is built to beat Ohio State. Like, that is how they design their roster, design their playbook, everything. They built a team that can beat Ohio State. And for that reason, TCU actually gave them trouble. And if you look back during the season, there were games where Michigan struggled. The final score, once they, depth and talent finally won out in the second half. But in the first half, there were a lot of games where they were trailing or had slight leads. And that is an interesting aspect of this because if you're Ohio State, you have to be thinking, whatever we've been doing, they've figured it out. What do we change to give them a different kind of team that they have to face? Because they have the ability to recruit really high talent. You know, when you can bring in talented guys, you can make changes if you're willing to, if you're Ryan Day, give up the play calling on offense and give it to your offensive coordinator. If you're willing to make changes on defense, what are they going to do to fix this problem? Because right now, just running out the same approach year after year is not going to work anymore. It seems like.
One other topic I wanted to broach as we're kind of wrapping up here. We already talked about the fact that Clemson poached Garrett Riley from TCU, but what are your thoughts, JD, on the rumors? Well, it seems very strong rumors that Kendall Briles is the target for as his replacement at TCU.
Man, talk about a heel turn if you're a TCU fan, especially if you have someone in the direct Briles family coming and coaching at TCU. I know that as of right now, nothing is final. I think there's a very large contingency of TCU media and influencers who are very upset with the idea of the hire, and they've kind of tried to do this trial balloon to see what it's going to look like if they were to hire Briles. And there was even a column today in the Fort Worth Star Telegram condemning the possibility, even the insiders with like Frogs Today and Horned Frog Blitz, they've been talking about like, hey, you know what? We are not thrilled with this hire. We want to do something other than this. But if you're Sonny Dykes, I mean, you coach with Art Briles at Texas Tech. You've known Kendall for a while. And right now, that criteria for who's going to be our offensive coordinator, the three criteria seem to be young, knows air raid concepts, knows Texas, and technically Kendall Briles certainly does fit the bill. I think what a lot of TCU fans are going through is, well, aren't there like 40 other people who also fit this mold, and they aren't necessarily in the Briles family? I'm not going to do anything on TCU behalf saying like, oh, think about the issues that came from Baylor back in the day, because Sonny Dykes had already hired Kaz Kazadi as a strength and conditioning coach, who had a very important role at Baylor as their strength and conditioning coach. During that time under Art Briles, they've had a couple of other staffers who have been from the Baylor system in the Briles tree before. But at least for someone like Sonny Dykes, who at this point has already had on-field coaches poached by the defending Super Bowl champions, the defending college football champions, stolen by now in the ACC, the dynasty of the last decade out on that East Coast with Clemson taking their offensive coordinator, it just seems odd that Kendall Briles is the one that he decided, hey, you know what? This is the future. This is the next guy who's going to be the next up and comer. I want him. I think it's a strange hire. I see how it fits. But at least in the feedback that TCU fans have been having, I think the best term here is probably unforced error for Sonny Dykes in terms of TCU fans being receptive to a Briles being on their campus.
That makes a lot of sense. I always forget how these ties go deep for some of these guys. And also, now that I think about it, I remember seeing Lincoln Riley on the sideline before the game at SoFi. And then, of course, I'm like, of course, part of it's LA, and obviously he lives there, and they'd happily give him a sideline pass, but he was there probably to also support his brother. I keep forgetting about that, since his brother was coaching in that game, of course, as the offensive coordinator of what was purportedly the TCU Horned Frogs. But I did read your statement last week, JD. So but just one last thing for you. It's been a couple of weeks. What are your thoughts on that national championship game?
Well, I've said it before. I will say it again. What a fun and chaotic season for TCU. Let them hang the banners. Let them celebrate it. They successfully hit on a 13-leg BS parlay to make it into the national championship game. And, yes, they were blown out in the worst bowl game deficit in the history of the college football playoffs and the BCS. But you know what? Texas is spending more money than God, and they can't get there. Texas A&M spending more money than God, they can't get there. Oklahoma had 4 chances to get into a national playoff or into a national championship game. They choked in the playoffs every single time. Michigan, desperate to get into a national championship game. They've yet to win a bowl game under Jim Harbaugh. Notre Dame would absolutely love to be blown out by an SEC team in the national championship again. They can't win a playoff game. You know who did win a playoff game? TCU, a team that was destined to be 7th in their own conference under a first-year head coach in what was supposed to be a rebuilding year. The fact that they pulled off that absolute larceny of making it to the national championship game is what makes college football intensely fun. I don't care about the result of the game. I love the fact that we got a true Cinderella for the first time in a very long time in college football. And what an absolute ride to watch that first year with Sonny Dykes. We're definitely going to see a drop-off from TCU next year with losing a lot of productivity, especially on the offense. But man, what a ride for this year. That's what college football is all about.
Indeed. Well, as we go ahead and wrap up here, one other story I'm just going to mention because I think it's funny. The Dennis Collin, the Popeyes kid, who I think a lot of folks like myself forgot that meme had anything to do with Popeyes. I'm sure some of you saw that story that kind of developed over the week. He's a Division II football player now, which makes a lot of people feel old. At Lake Erie College, he's now over 300 pounds playing offensive line. He's best known as the kid looking at "Why Are You Filming Me?" Kind of with his Popeyes in his hand. And when somebody realized that was him, they started this online kind of thing on Twitter demanding that Popeyes give him an NIL deal, and lo and behold, they did, which is kind of cool. I think that's wonderful. I mean, that's the nice side of NIL. For all the talking about $13 million deal falling apart for, for Jaden over at Florida, you get this cute little story where Popeye sports this kid who was a meme back in the day, and now he gets something nice going on there. We've been trying to figure out what that deal is all about. I don't know if he gets a free card that maybe lets him and his fellow offensive linemen dine for free, but who knows? That's good for him. That's all I just wanted to say about that. But, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. It's a little bit over an hour. We usually like to do these for about an hour every Tuesday night. Now that we're starting to warm up and I'm hopefully going to get over the latest illness that struck me, we're going to get some guests on the lineup in the near future. But no matter what, we always, Tuesday nights, we like to hear from you and just talk general college football. So on behalf of myself, Bobak Ieri, on behalf of my co-hosts, JD Moore and Sirius, thank you all for joining us. Now, I'm going to hang up and listen.